What's up, everybody? It is the Dark Conservatarian, and welcome back to another Strike Force interview. This time, I am with Osmo Ordo, and we're going to be talking about capitalism. Today, say hi and introduce yourself, Osmo. Strike Force interview. This time, sorry for everyone that might have heard that bit
Top
of
in the
reverb
morning
right
to you,
there.
laddies.
Sorry, is our internet slow?
What?
Is our internet out of sync with each other?
My internet?
No, I was asking
Hold
if our
up.
internet
What?
was out of sync there because I was telling you to introduce yourself, and then it was kind of a delay, and then you started saying hi, laddies, and all that stuff.
There might be a delay, although I can hear you perfectly fine I can hear you perfectly fine right now, so maybe it's a your thing on your end. But,
Funny, I'm
top
like,
in the morning to you, laddies. I'm Osmo.
go on. I'll let you go. Sorry.
Wait, go on with what?
Yeah, go on with your introduction. I mean,
To read you my bio, I'm, Osmo Ordo. So basically, I am a. Damn it! Why isn't it working? Uh,
wasn't what working?
uh, there we go.
I'm sorry,
Basically,
by the way, everybody.
if you read my Twitter bio, it says that I am a.
Dang it! I'm so sorry about this, everybody, for the what seems to be happening right here. We did not have this much of a delay between our connections here. That when we were off air, but for some reason, as soon as I go on air, our connections seem to be out of sync. So there's a slight delay in our speaking. So it's not going to be as fluid as I was originally hoping it would be. Do you think that maybe you could get out and then
Shit.
get back
Yeah,
in very briefly, Osmo? To maybe that'll help things out, fix it somehow.
sure. Leave. Where is it? Where is it? Oh, there we are. Leave studio.
Yeah, sorry everybody for the funky beginning there. This has turned out to be, yeah, man, which is of lower quality. The last live stream of where that I interviewed Gabby, who had like a crappy internet connection where it kept on kicking her out of the call, or this one of where that it seems that our internet connection has a bit of a delay in it, so it's not as fluid. But hello, JC Armitage in the live chat. Glad you could join us so far. Nobody else has shown up, then maybe that's for the best. But nonetheless, we're waiting on Osmo to try and join back in, and I think I just heard him come back in right now. All right, so Osmo, repeat after me. Testing 1, 2, 3.
Testing. 1, 2, 3.
All right, that's a whole lot more fluid. So anyway, sorry about that, folks. I think that we might have solved it for the right now. But anyway, to make a long introduction long, as we're already 3 minutes and 45 seconds into this interview, introduce yourself, Osmo, to the audience.
Hello, I am Osmo. I am as I call myself, post-right radical, a post-right radical, classical liberal. I am for all intents and purposes, you could call me an anarcho-capitalist, although I would sort of object to that label because I have problems with. I wouldn't say problems. It's more so other people have problems. So I'm like, to sort of cause much as little confusion as possible. I pretty much call myself a classical liberal, although it would kind of depend on who I'm talking to. For instance, if I'm talking
So
to
basically,
people
you're
who
a
are
Dave
like,
Rubin fan.
uh, wait, what?
I said, so basically, you're a Dave Rubin fan.
I'm not. It's been like
No, I'm joking. I'm
I haven't
making you.
heard from that guy in like a year.
Yeah, I'm joking about your whole classical liberal
I,
label, mostly because you say that there's like less confusion, but I don't know. Maybe somebody, if they were to get real nitpicky, they would start conflating classical liberalism with Dave Rubin's weird ideology, whatever he holds. But I would assume that your beliefs would widely differ away from his beliefs, self-proclaimed beliefs.
yes, yes, 100% yes. My sort of classical liberalism is a lot less, from what I've heard, or from what little I've heard of Dave Rubin talk. He's much more of a. I wouldn't call him a liberal. I'd call him a social democrat. Very unfortunately, the term liberal has been stolen
Um,
b- um,
that would be more
by
in his old
the
days.
social democrats. Unfortunately, the term liberal has been stolen by social democrats, predominantly by
Right.
people like FDR, but also to a very smaller extent, people who I wouldn't call them social democrats, but I would call him more so sort of like he helped spearhead that direction the term took. John Stuart Mill. I am not a fan of John Stuart Mill, and we can get to that throughout the stream. But basically, I would call myself a classical liberal, although I am fine. I would not object to being called an anarcho-capitalist or a Hoppian, as I sometimes call myself.
All right. All right. So, sorry, was that all that you wanted to say in
Uh,
the introduction of yourself?
um, I would also like to say that I am philosophically a postmodernist, although I do not want to open that can of worms, although we can if you want. Um,
Yeah.
and
Save that for later in the live stream. But you're saying?
yep, I also sort of call myself a thing called the post right. I've heard other people describe them as that. For instance, someone you might know, Jim Jesus. But
Only by name. Haven't really interacted with him a
since
lot.
since the term post right doesn't sorry, since the term post right doesn't necessarily mean anything, or at the very least it doesn't have a coherent term yet, I thought, I'm gonna pick this up and see what I can do with it. Sort of, I guess you could say it's less like it's. I guess you could say, in if we were to describe ideology as sort of like pots, like pots or vases. Instead of going to the store, the ceramic store, and picking up a already made vase, I decided to get some lump of clay, get my hands wet, and see what I can do. You know.
Mm-hmm. Was that it?
Other than that, that's about it.
All right. So,
I am also notorious for this guy's comment section or his live stream section for describing capitalism as a form of artificial intelligence, which we can get into.
right? That'll probably be the first thing that we'll get into, actually. But yes, so to make a long intro long, but nonetheless, and hello, Zachary calling the live chat, by the way. But the main reason as to why that I organized this live stream with Osmo Ordo here is because, one, he keeps on referring to capitalism as a form of AI, and just want to explore that idea with him. And two, it's also because he inadvertently, I don't think anybody was intending this to happen, but he inadvertently ended up getting ripped off from being part of the capitalism special that Nate had arranged a little over a month ago, I think it was. But yeah, he was supposed to
Yeah, it
arrive
was
on that,
because
but
of a
then there was
schedule difference. I had a
schedule
summer
conflicts.
job. Yeah, I had a summer job back during that time. Luckily now, I'm sort of off for the rest of the summer until the it's
Until the school year
13th.
starts.
The 13th. Next Thursday, I'm going
Okay.
back to school. But for the meantime, I'm off work. Um, also, that around that time
Next
was sort of
Thursday.
before I sort of
Never mind. Go
hmm?
on. Go on.
Also around the time the special was being produced. That was before I sort of made my hallelujah moment where I realized, wait, what if this capitalism thing is actually some kind? It can be best described as a kind of artificial intelligence. So even if I could make it there, I doubt I probably would have gotten on the same kind of tirade that I'm gonna go on today.
Right. So since we're on that, actually, explain what you mean by that exactly. Capitalism being a form of artificial intelligence.
Well, it's not really my idea. I wouldn't say stole it, but I adopted it from a much greater thinker, I would say. Nick Land. Nick Land. He's basically a good old British chap. He's not British. He lives in China or Pyongyang, or not Pyongyang. That's North Korea. Beijing. Yes, he lives in Beijing
Yeah.
now. Something. The reason he did that is because apparently, in reading his works, he says something about cities being a form of time machine. I don't know. He says a lot of weird shit. Uh,
Are these like
as
forms
do
of
all
meta?
continental philosophers, but basically,
Are these like some metaphors that he keeps on using? Because these are some very odd metaphors, in my opinion, to be
yes,
calling these
it's very
different things.
metaphorical. I tried to read his work. I did not understand a single thing he said until I started to ask his temporaries, like, what does, like, some people who are much more steeped into this guy than I am, and they basically cleared things out for me, and I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot more sense, actually. Uh, but basically, if you plan on reading continental philosophy, people like Hegel, Foucault, what's that other guy's name? Kant. They use a lot of jargon that people who aren't already like
K A N
nose deep
T.
in this stuff.
When you say Kant,
Yes,
you mean a guy who goes by the last name of Kant, K A N
yes.
T. Okay.
Um. So basically, the what I have written down here, basically his idea that capitalism is artificial intelligence comes from basically Marx's something called commodity fetishism or reification. It's hard to describe what those things are, primarily because I neglected to do the research on what those are. I just copy pasted what people told me. But basically, what he says is that Marx saw that capital was some kind of alien force that would drive human behavior and production. Everything that has began to be succumbed under this process of acceleration or the MCM MCM pattern. Don't ask me what that is. I don't know either. Which is sort of like a self what is that word?
Applicable.
Self amplification. So basically, what Land does next is basically he takes this idea and and ex, ex, abstracts from this. Why is my mouth not working today? He basically abstracts from this and argues that capital is basically a giant alien intelligence that is basically in a constant positive feedback loop. Basically, what a feedback loop is basically you have an input, and basically that input goes and produces an output. But basically, that output circles back into the input. That is basically it's a little bit more complex. The concept of feedback loops talks about complexity, how as the loop progresses, think the system becomes more and more intricate, whereas a negative feedback process is the other way around, where basically the output feeds back into the. Wait, I need to look this up. Uh, as you can tell, I did not do proper background research before doing this. But
Um,
I
yeah, like out of curiosity, I don't mean this
I only
to
looked
come off.
into
I don't mean this to come off wrong or
positive
condescending or anything like that. But how much did you go reading into these ideas before concluding that they are what you say they are, as far as capitalism being AI and etc.
um it sort of focused on sort of like the broad ideas of it. I was basically looked into this means that and that means that. I guess you could say that. So I do have sort of like a pretty good understanding of the whole system, but I tend to what I do when I'm talking to people, like what we're doing right now, is I tend to over explain a lot of background stuff that I don't necessarily need to go into, which is why I'm kind of mentally flopping right now.
Right. I think it would be best
But
to
basically,
focus on the ideas themselves as opposed to their backgrounds.
yes.
Like
So basically, the way I would describe it is that capitalism is basically a sort of soft artificial intelligence. What that means is basically what we have now in terms of AI, like common factory machines, and we also have. You could also abstract. You can also take what I'm about to say as sort of capitalism being a form of hard AI, which is what you usually see in some sci-fi movies. Now,
could this be at all
the
similar to
way
the idea of the economy under libertarianism being guided by the invisible hand?
Yes, in fact, I've
That
heard it
metaphor.
explained that capitalism as artificial intelligence being a more sort of updated version of Smith's invisible hand, although it beyond the invisible hand there are a lot of other implications of talking about capitalism as a form of artificial intelligence. So um, the way AI works is that it has feedback loops. It's sort of there's an input that feeds into an output, which feeds back into the wait. No, I got it right. Input, output, input. Yeah. As you can tell, guys, my brain is a fucking mess. Um, so as this process goes on, it sort of becomes more complex. What happens then is the AI is sort of able to sort of learn from its mistakes, able to learn to navigate the environment. Um, for instance, I forget when this was, but
Oh,
basically there was a video a long time ago, basically a little tiny robot thing on a table, and it was trying to move from one place to another, and a lot of
s-
things in its way. It
so
was
wait.
able to sort of and
You,
as
you say that one of the things with artificial intelligence is that it's a self-learning or it's a learning intelligence, but it's artificial at the same time that can self-adapt to these different kinds of environments and improve itself on
yes,
its survivability and existence sort of skills and abilities. And you think that capitalism is the same way, that if left untampered with, it will evolve itself into something that is superior and
yes, and there's
highly
also a
efficient?
yes, there's also an example
Okay.
that people like Nick Land, people like another guy who's in the accelerationist movement named Transhumania, although his real name is Alex. He basically a good way to describe the similarities between capitalism is and AI is to take a very simple paperclip. And no, this is not going to be a rehashed version of the iPencil thing and division of labor, millions of people working on this paperclip. No, it's a lot different. So basically, this idea comes from, or the initial idea for this AI thing comes from some guy, or a Swedish philosopher named Nick Bostrom, who basically talks about this in. Damn it, I forgot what the name of that paper was, but basically he says, let's say hypothetically that this corporation, this company, designs an artificial intelligence and gives it a simple goal: make paper clips. And what Nick Bostrom explains in this essay is, basically he explores different avenues that the AI can go down. For instance, there's the catastrophic form of it, which Transhumania kind of subscribes to. He is kind of like in the mutualist kind of. He calls himself a sort of mutualist accelerationist. He's sort of, what the AI does with that information is it basically dismantles the whole thing. It dismantles the entire corporation. No more bolts, no more anything, and turns all those resources into paper clips. And then when the executives are like, stop, 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 and it's already too late. The AI has already rendered the planet uninhabitable. Why? Because it literally harvested every resource it could to make paper clips. And that's sort of what Transhumania talks about. That is kind of what capitalism is doing. I would say that to an extent, yes, but to the extent that it is doing that, the efforts of sort of misallocating resources like that is solely the fault of government. That is solely the fault of government. And the other avenue that Nick Bostrom takes with this AI is that basically this artificial intelligence, like, in order to maximize paper clips, it branches off into fields that have nothing to do with paper clips. For instance, it goes into what's it called again? It goes into art, the fields of finance, fields of art, fields of philosophy, fields of military tactics or something, trade routes, all that to sort of try to maximize paper clips. For instance, it might want to learn finance so it can better so it can, as peacefully as possible, secure resources to make paper clips. It might go into philosophy and art, thinking about what is a paper clip, what does it mean to be a paper clip, and all those
What does
things.
it mean to
And
be a paperclip? What kind of drugs have you been getting on to ask these kinds of questions to yourself? Or the philosophers that you've read that have posed that question, what kind of drugs were they on to be asking that question to themselves?
But basically, it goes into these things, and from this very simple premise, build paper clips. It starts to sort of through the process of through the process of feed feedback positive feedback loops, through the process of trial and error. It basically becomes this supercomputer, this web of it goes very quickly from this very central, unified, defined thing, and then it spreads out, becoming ever more complex, ever more intricate, ever more what's another word for that? You get the point. And another thing that you might agree with it on face value, but this next part that Land goes into, you might find a little head scratching. Got me a bit thinking until he basically said that capitalism is basically an independent thing, that that capital has its own motives. And you might think, well, that doesn't make sense. How does that work? And I was thinking the same thing. Like, how does capital like have its own thing? And for instance, one of the things land goes into is this thing he calls, or this thing called the he like for instance, traditional Marxists talk about sort of liberating humanity, sort of through sort of the process of um, accelerationism. Well, Land's interpretation of it used to be sort of that Marxist, let's push capitalism, or let's push classical liberal economics to its brink and have it basically to the point where it can't sustain itself, it collapses, and from that we'll build this socialist utopia. Land has sort of since he had sort of through a libertine lifestyle, he unfortunately had he suffered psychosis, and after that his
So,
thinking took a very
keeping on the idea though. Sorry.
yeah.
No, no, I was just I don't know. I was
You
just
were trying to
thinking.
direct my thinking, or direct
Yes,
what I was about to
that
say.
was what I was trying to do. I
Okay.
mean, I
Yeah, but
don't mean to be an
basically he
ass,
took a
but
hard
still.
turn to the right and now is in full support of capitalism or classical liberalism or whatever. But basically, his idea was that he wanted to, instead of liberating people as traditional Marxists want to do, Land is interested in the liberation of the means of production itself. You might think that doesn't make sense. I thought so too, but then you need to ponder, what is automation? What is automation doing? What Land would argue is that what automation is liberating the means of production, making it self autom giving the means of production its own autonomy, you know. These ideas are a
I think
little hard for my head to wrap around, as many of you might be thinking. I'm still trying to work out the nuts and bolts in my head.
yeah,
I'm
because
trying
I
to
think the idea of leftists would be to air quotes liberate the means of production over to the people that are providing, well, the means of production, that being the worker and so forth.
Yes, but that sort of type of,
Not
hold on, let
to
me
be
take this off. It's
liberating,
a bit hot.
not to be liberating the means of production to itself, or whatever exactly you're trying to say right there.
Yeah. Um, but Marxism is kind of steeped in this kind of Enlightenment humanism, which Land, at least now, rejects. Excuse me. So that's about it
All
in
right.
terms of capital AI.
Okay.
That's a lot to chew on, isn't it?
Well, sure. I don't know if there's like something that something really important that I have missed as far as the identifying of it goes. I mean, I'm gonna be honest. The one thing that really stuck out to me on helping define of how that capitalism is a form of AI is the idea that capitalism, in the same way of an artificial intelligence, would become a self-learning entity that would be able to evolve to be self-sustaining, and also to be able to circumvent and supersede these obstacles that get in its way, or that sort of stand against it in its existence.
Yeah, that's actually one of the
Survivability and
ways
whatnot.
that
Like, that's the one
that's
thing
one of
that
the
made most sense. And you were saying that capitalism is the same way in that regards, of where that capitalism, in order for it to continue to exist, it will evolve into something greater than it currently is if left untampered. That was the thing that
yeah,
made
and
most sense
you
to
can
me.
even make an argument that it's already doing that. It's already sort of it's sort of finding a way to circumnavigate the current rules and regulations, you could say. Sort of looking for a way to do that.
Right. I don't know if
Uh,
I don't know if how
for
much I would
instance, with
frame it
things
that
like
way.
tax stuff. For instance, with like exploiting tax loopholes. We have things right now like the modern invention of Bitcoin. The invention of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and the blockchain. Something interesting, actually, about the blockchain, if I may stick on that subject right now, is that Nick Land, this is, goes into this idea of basically, you know, Immanuel Kant, right? He basically
Yeah,
talks
that name
about
only I only it only sounds familiar to me by name. I do not know of who Immanuel Kant is. Kant is
we can
how
go
that
about
I would pronounce it.
we
But
can go over
is it
that
more
when I
appropriately
sort of
called Kant? Pronounced Kant?
I think it was Kant. I don't know. I need to look into the German pronunciation.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of German names sound weird. For instance, Hegel. People say his name is George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, except properly understood in the way that it's pronounced in German, his name should actually be called Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel or Georg, something like that.
Gay orc.
I don't know. Germans are weird.
And just saying.
Anyway, basically Kant talks about space time, space and time, trying to define what those are, and he basically comes to the conclusion that space and time do not exist, and they are forms of our perception. Like Kant has this nice little metaphor that that the sort of the way we observe things, that I observe this falling down, I observe causality, I observe there is something beyond my body, I observe that there is um time move that I observe that time moves in a strict progression. He would say that those are forms of our perception, that they do not exist independent of the mind. And he, or what Nick Land does, he basically has this video. It's a video on YouTube talking about how. Or just Google Nick Land blockchain.
All
Google
right.
that, and you would know what I'm talking about. But it's hard for me to articulate it here. But he basically says that the blockchain, Bitcoin, and all that stuff has implications within that sort of within that Kantian idea that space and time are forms of our perception. I'm new to this stuff, so if you asked me to go over that, I can't. Boom ching.
Okay. Right, the pun there. Libertarian Sith, just to address the chat here a little bit. And hello, by the way, Libertarian Sith in the live chat. He says, "What's so bad about Hegel?"
Don't even
Correct
get me fucking started on that.
correct me if I'm wrong, but it wasn't Hegel like one of Marx's associates or something, or
I don't know if they ever met. One thing that
maybe
we do
I'm
know is
mixing things
that
up.
uh, Marx was, I wouldn't say a student of Hegel, but Marx most definitely took inspiration from Hegel.
Or maybe I'm thinking of Frederick Engels. Uh,
No, they were both Hegel and Engels, or both Marx and Engels were sort of followers of Hegel. Um,
okay.
my main problem with Hegel is his sort of dialectic. He talks basically excuse my burping, but Hegel's dialectic can be summed up as um, synthesis, or no, that synthesis is the last one.
So,
Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So basically, the dialectic says that we have our current state, the way things are, is the the thesis, and then what comes into contact with the thesis is the synthesis between the. So he basically says that contained within sort of an item, this is a broken pair of those clamp things. There's a lot of things here. A pair of um,
By the way,
contained within it is everything that it isn't, and so basically the so contained within the thesis is everything that isn't the thesis,
by the
and it
way,
comes
very
into
quickly.
contact with something else.
Hey,
Yeah.
Osmo. Yeah, very quickly. George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, here on DuckDuckGo. George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel was a German philosopher considered one of the most important figures in German idealism. He was one of the fundamental figures of Western philosophy, with his influence extending to the entire range of contemporary philosophical issues, from aesthetics to ontology to politics, both in the analytic and continental tradition. So there's nothing here explicit about whether or not he had influence within the philosophy of socialism or the belief in socialism in general.
Yeah,
So I
Hegel
might be thinking of
was.
someone else actually, but
I
go
would
on, Osmo.
describe. Yeah. His basic idea is that everything contains difference, but but I would agree with that. I would basically take that one step further than Hegel did. That everything is pure difference. This is the kind of the line that Gilles Deleuze takes in his book Difference and Repetition. But basically, the way Hegel says is that difference is only there to be negated. I reject this wholeheartedly. But basically, this other than that, I would say that Hegel is I other Hegel I would say sometimes he's good, most of the time he's just straight up bad. One of the things I would say that he is good on is his critique of what was it called again? His critique of the categorical imperative. Outside of his critique of his criticism of the categorical imperative, I reject wholeheartedly everything that motherfucker had to say.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not surprising that Hegel influenced Marx, considering, or what I would sort of describe Hegel in terms of politics is, I'm just gonna flat out say it, Hegel was a straight up proto fascist.
Hmm.
Hegel was a fascist or a proto
Really?
fascist.
He was like what, advocating for the censorship and suppression of speech all in the name of German nationalism at the time, or something like that.
Yeah, he helped pioneer this bullshit understanding of freedom for to the fascists, to Benito Mussolini, to a lesser extent Hitler. I wouldn't say that Hitler was more rhetoric and was not as ideological as some of the Italian people like Mussolini, like Giovanni Gentile. The way Hitler was more sort of rhetoric. He didn't have that base. Mussolini, Gentile did. The way Gentile and Mussolini got their ideas predominantly from Hegel. A lot of the other stuff was a botched understanding of Nietzsche.
I heard it pronounced more as Nietzsche, more than Nietzsche, but whatever. You were saying?
Um, but basically, the way that the fascists understand freedom is they sort of see freedom as being one with the state. That's basically their
Ah.
understanding of it.
And that was
Um,
essentially what Hegel was trying to espouse with all the all the quotes that he is famous for and whatnot.
in a sense, yes. Another thing I reject about
Hmm.
Hegel was his idealism. Basically, he was part of this school of thought called German idealists, which is basically, I'd say, a more sort of which is German idealism is kind of like an updated version of Plato's philosophy. Basically, Plato's idea is basically that
Hello? You're kind of breaking up right there. Wait, Osmo,
grab
Osmo.
this stuff here.
Wait, Osmo. Wait.
Yeah.
You were kind of breaking up for a second there. You said that Plato's idea was what now? Hello?
What?
You were breaking up for quite a bit there. You were saying Plato's idea, and then you started roboting real bad to where I heard dead silence for a few seconds, and then I heard some rustling around in the background like you were arranging something by
I
your
was
monitor
grabbing
or whatever.
stuff.
But
Basically, to explain
Plato's idea was
Plato's
what?
philosophy, let's take these three objects. This is a screwdriver, this is a screwdriver, and this is a screwdriver. These are all screwdrivers, but there's differences between them. So, how do we understand them all to be screwdrivers? Plato's answer is that somewhere out there, there is an ethereal form of the quote unquote perfect screwdriver that basically the essences of these things, base ancient philosophy basically says that basically everything has an essence. I completely reject that notion, but basically the essence of a screwdriver basically came from this realm that was called the world of forms, and
So Hegel was a statist.
Everything in reality, everything within reality, is basically an idea. Sort of nothing is real. You can't trust your senses. Your senses distort. Things like that. Which is basically the stark opposite of this thing called materialism, which basically states that it's basically physical reductionism. For instance, they don't believe in things like ghosts or spirits. Materialists don't. Um, Basically, that's the opposite. Basically, that's the basic gist of it. And Hegel was more explicit about this. Kant's philosophy, it could be called idealism, although it's even called transcendental idealism. Although Kant was very uncomfortable with this idea, even though he came up with the term transcendental idealism. Like, there's even a chapter within the Critique of Pure Reason literally called The Refutation of Idealism. Which isn't to say that Kant was a materialist, although he wasn't an idealist either. He was something else. We'll talk about that later.
Okay, so Libertarian Sith, as I was about to read his super chat. So Hegel was a statist. That was a question, actually. I mean,
yes.
It sounds pretty much like it. A statist in the most extreme sense, it seems. Red Feather says, and by the way, hello Red Feather in the chat. Glad you could join us. She says, in response to your whole screwdriver analogy, oh gosh, don't even get me started on the number of Allen wrenches there are. Right? So, all right. So I think we might have got the whole capitalism as AI idea sort of down.
Yeah, and so then we can, if you want to. Wait, you were saying?
Well, I was about to get on more to capitalism itself, as opposed to whatever analogy that we want to use for capitalism.
That's exactly the same thing I was about to do.
Yeah, like I said earlier at the very beginning of this live stream, Osmo here, he got kind of inadvertently ripped off, mostly because of schedule conflicts from joining the Capitalism Special. So I thought I would give him a chance on this platform to speak. Right, yes, for work. Just important stuff in general. I guess I would ask, what is your opinion of capitalism? What are your criticisms and defenses of capitalism? And I guess what would you say as your opening statement of that capitalism special, if you're on that capitalism special? What would you have to say about capitalism right then, I guess, if you're on there?
Well, one thing I would say is sort of I would whether or not I would describe myself as a capitalist would entirely depend upon who I'm talking about, because capitalism is it's a lot like I don't know. Are you familiar with the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein?
No,
He had
I
this
thought you were gonna say Ludwig von Mises.
Ludwig Wittgenstein. He
Yeah,
basically
I've heard
had
of him.
this idea of he's basically an analytic thinker who talks about language and how it works. And
He's
one of the things
basically a
he
what
talks about
thinker?
is this thing called
Wait, Osmo?
analytic.
Analytic thinker.
Analytic.
Okay.
Yeah, his main thing was a talking about language and how it works. One of the things he talks about is that he gives an example of a beetle. Let's say that everybody on the earth has a box. This is a shoe box, but let's pretend that inside this box is something called a beetle. We cannot see what's in, or this is a metaphor for words and people's heads. We can't look inside your head to see what exactly you mean by capitalism. We can't look inside your head to see what exactly you mean by beetle. And so basically, everyone on Earth has a box with a beetle in it, but we can't look inside the box to see what a beetle is. So everybody has a different box, different thing inside of it. You know what I mean? So basically, using that analogy,
So pretty
I would
much almost everybody has a different definition of what capitalism is.
yes, and I would sort of describe myself as a anarcho-capitalist. To some people, I would call myself a classical liberal. To others, although I sort of
I
on
got a
my own, I
question.
would sort of yeah.
What are some of the different definitions? Because I just want to like expound on that idea a bit before we
Um,
get away from
the
it. Like
definition that
the two main definitions that I've heard people apply capitalism to be is a the definition that ANCAPs and myself and other free market capitalists like to prescribe to, and is that it is like free markets and private ownership of private property and the means of production as opposed to being coerced by government. That's like not verbatim, but it's a paraphrasing,
yes,
definition of it. And then
that's in fact that's the
the second definition would be the one that I guess the more left market anarchists and authoritarian socialists would say is that capitalism is corporatism or stuff like that. So, what other
yeah.
definitions have you heard people use?
Those are the only two definitions I've heard. Um, it, for instance, the when I was talking about capitalism and artificial intelligence in the first part of this interview, I was predominantly using the former definition you used, the definition that of private property, of free and voluntary exchange, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And if I'm talking to people who are on the other side of the definition, I would call myself a classical liberal to them, although, sort of, when I'm on my own, when I'm thinking about this stuff, I would sort of try to reject both those labels. For instance, view labels as sort of something shackling me, shackling my thinking. As I said, at the beginning of this, or wait, did I give this metaphor off air or on air? I don't know, but basically, I don't like to go down to the pottery store to buy a pot. I like to make my pottery myself. I like to make my own ideas. I do not like to go out to the store, to the Proud Han store to the Rothbard store and
Yeah,
buy my ideologies.
you gave that more off air. Um, I guess
What I
I don't
would
know.
describe
I was about to
myself
say
as.
I was about to say that most to all people kind of are that way, but then again, there is groupthink and cultish like mindsets that are
Yeah.
that exist on the different fringes of the internet, and even within normie politics with Republican versus Democrat, this stuff like that.
Yeah. Up here in
So,
Canada, we have
oh,
luckily up here in Canada, we have a lot more diversity in terms of the political parties. The liberals and conservatives,
I
much
thought
like the
you were
U.S.
like here in America at first. Not gonna lie,
um,
but the liberals and conservatives are what?
basically, basic more diversity in terms of the parties. Some of the third parties are covered a lot more by the press. Um, Although up here in Canada, much like down there in the States, it's almost always the liberals or the conservatives who are in charge. Um, although I am sort of lucky, but not really, that we have this diversity up here in Canada in terms of thinking. Or what I meant when or maybe that's not the right words to use. I'm lucky that we have um, more political diversity than the states. What I'm unlucky about is what the people do with that thinking. What I'm unlucky about is Trudeau's authoritarianism. Uh, Aaron O'Toole. That name is very ironic. O'Toole. Um,
It's very
um,
ironic, or it's very fitting for the type of person he is.
yes. But basically, the Conservative Party's track record isn't exactly that different from the Liberals,
Okay.
much like them in the
So
states.
basically, Aaron O'Toole is a real tool, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm gonna bring this back a little bit, back to the whole defining of capitalism. So I guess relating this to the capitalism special a little bit, if you were like in that capitalism special, you would sort of, would you say that you would kind of I'm sorry. To anybody listening, I don't want to make this a this side versus this side sort of a debate or whatever, but I'm gonna have to in order to make my point here. But essentially, you would put yourself more on the side of Nate and all of them who want to sort of get rid of the term and think that's a
No.
useless term,
Well, yes,
and
but
so
for a
therefore you
different
wouldn't call yourself
reason.
that.
Well, for a different reason. I would agree that generally, yes, private ownership of the means of production is good. I am very much I am not a fan of horizontal or sort of democratic structures of organizing or sort of company building. Although if people want to do that, I have no problem with that.
Okay.
I have a problem when I'm involved. You could say, I guess you could say, um, but other than that, I would sort of have a problem with capitalism for purely the. I would have problem with capitalism purely for the reason that it's sort of debated upon. Um,
As far as the
Although I guess you could
definition
say
go,
that it's
or because it's
yes.
debated upon
Although
in
you
both areas,
could
both the
say that
definition and the ethics of it.
yeah,
Uh,
although you could say that since it's such a poorly defined idea that it's ripe for you could make an argument that because it's so poorly defined, I could pretty much like I'm doing with post-right, I could pretty much pick up capitalism and do whatever with it. That doesn't work because it's so widely used that yeah, it just doesn't work at that scale. So since the
so
clay,
essentially, essentially, you say that you agree with all the principles that people who call themselves capitalists, like myself and Nightshift and so forth, that you agree with the ethics and beliefs and ideals that we prescribe to capitalism, but you
Yeah.
don't necessarily like to call yourself the term. You don't necessarily agree with the usage of the term. Do I have that right, or what?
In a sense, yes. Although my main objection to it would be less along the lines of, oh, what it actually means is this, this, and this. And I would think, like, instead of trying to fight over who gets to call themselves that, why not make up some other term? Why not make something up, which is basically the side that I'm on, you could say,
Hmm.
which is what I'm doing with the when I'm call myself a post right. I'm like, this term is perfect. It's like nobody uses it. Um, the definition is vague. Nobody's ever heard of it. I could pick this up and basically, like clay, I can get my hands wet, do with it whatever I so choose. That is sort of one of my main attractions to calling myself a post rightist.
So in that case, we'll go back to talking about the capitalism special later. But for right now, explain what that means actually to be a post-right guy, a post-right winger.
Before we can talk about that, we need to talk about Immanuel Kant. And before we can talk about Immanuel Kant, we need to talk about David Hume. So basically, everything that Immanuel Kant is, every sort of Kant is sort of talked about as sort of the greatest of all time philosopher. Um, and nobody ever inherits
I thought that
the
was
greatest of
Socrates or
all time.
Aristotle.
Yeah, there's actually an argument you could be made that basically that Kant should be included within like the big three of philosophy. Like, personally, I wouldn't call Socrates a philosopher. I mean, his main idea was skepticism, so was Hume's. But like, one thing I sort of wouldn't say is that he didn't necessarily have a coherent way of thinking. Well, not coherent, but he sort of reduced everything to skepticism. He didn't really well, I mean, he did pioneer stuff. Or now that I think about it, maybe he could be included. The main reason why I'm sort of a bit iffy about Socrates is that Socrates never wrote anything down. Like, for instance, a lot of people say that Socrates, much like Plato, was an idealist. I would have to interject with that and tell you that you should keep in mind that the things that we quote unquote do know about Socrates was pretty much it was written by Plato in sort of fictional scenarios. A lot of ancient Greek philosophy is explained through sort of these stories and sort of made up dialogues between people. So we don't even know if Socrates was a real person, let alone what he believed. But basically, throughout Plato's work, Socrates within Plato's work is sort of like a mouthpiece for it. Socrates within Plato's work serves as Plato's mouthpiece. Um, but basically, the my big three for philosophy would have to be Plato, Aristotle, and Immanuel Kant. You could say that.
By the way, I'm sorry. I did not mean to end up putting you on a tangent or whatever about what the big three philosophers are. But how does this connect again to what post-rightism is?
Yes. So basically, Kant had this idea of sort of critique. For instance, his three big works are the critique of pure reason, the critique of practical reason, and the critique of judgment. Now, Kant means something a little different when he uses the word critique. For instance, when he critiques judgment, he's not sort of trying to look into what's wrong with judgment. He's sort of what Kant means by why critique is sort of less sort of trying to say what's wrong with this thing and more so sort of analyzing its details, its intricacies. It's sort of trying to figure out what are its limits, what is it capable of, that those kinds of questions. And sort of what I would say post-rightism is basically taking that same kind of critique. Like instead of trying to critique human understanding, I'm trying to critique politics. I'm trying to apply that sort of critique of trying to analyze, trying to come up, trying to think about where it gets right, where what are sort of the political limits of sort of the very broad right wing. You could say that.
Okay.
Um, that's basically the idea in a nutshell.
So I guess I don't know how definitive that is to me as
I'm
far as
still
the
kind of
differences
working on
between
it.
typical right wing people, beliefs and post right wing beliefs.
Um,
But you said
post
that the differentiating definition and description you would have to still think about.
that's the idea that I took to sort of thinking about it. The more general idea is sort of like basically take the right, basically take, let's say, Bob, which is basically rightism the person. He has like anatomy, like his heart beats capitalism, his mind thinks like order, organization. Those are the things that I would call sort of very broad right wing, and basically take Bob the rightist and strap him down to a table. And then you get a bunch of surgical equipment and basically like inject things like postmodernism, a lot of post structuralism, postmodernism, a lot of ideas such as egoism and Max Stirner's ideas into that, and basically watch Bob transform into basically this Hulk of theory. I guess you could say that.
All right. Um,
And I'm pretty much predominantly theory heavy when it comes to this. I'm sort of like I'm still trying to think about what the most optimal thing is. I'm still trying to
what the most optimal
like as a
definition would
joke,
be?
you could say that like where you guys are arguing about capitalism versus socialism, I've over there arguing about is space and time even real? That's kind of like my
Hmm.
entire thing, you could say.
Okay.
I'm trying to think about the more intricate details of a philosophy, trying to sort of like, because when you're talking about philosophy, there's a lot of assumptions you're making. There's a lot of assumptions about economics. Sometimes there's assumptions about whether or not space and time are actually real when you discuss philosophy or when you discuss politics. And what I'm simply doing
Okay.
is taking a step back, trying to establish those before I can take a step forward. And a lot of the times, or what's sort of happened when I sort of talking about post right is when I took a step back, I sort of connected the two. Sort of, a lot of people talk about politics as this abstract thing disconnected from um, the way, I wouldn't say that it's disconnected from the way the world works, but it's sort of disconnected from those like big questions about things like time and space, things like human perception, and like when I took a step back to rethink about time and space, when I sort of connected the two, you could say. That's generally my project.
Okay. Um, I guess I would have to ask then, or at least point out that the capitalism special is more about, in some ways, I guess, the definition of capitalism. Well, there wasn't a whole lot of discussion that gone on right then about the
Yeah.
definition of capitalism, but it was about,
Although
or the
I
title of
would
it
sort
was
of
whether or not that capitalism was libertarian. But what would you have to say in regards or in response to anything that was said on that special specifically, as opposed to talking about these philosophical concepts
excuse
of
me.
politics and so forth?
Um, I would say that oh boy. I I don't know. I need to go back and rewatch the special.
Oh, you haven't rewatched the? I mean, you have listened over to it at least once,
At
right?
least, yes, only once
Okay.
when it was first released. Um,
All right. I guess aside from the whole
one thing I
I guess aside from the whole definitions of capitalism and whether or not it's a useful term or not, is there anything like okay? Is there anything that you are critical of capitalism as far as the ethics that ANCAPs and those
um
sorts of people like to apply to capitalism, or do you even have any at all?
well, one thing I would like to start off is that when it comes to what's it called again? When it comes to capitalism as you would define it, I'm very critical of private property rights. Although on the other side of the debate,
Hmm.
I'm very critical of basically socialist ethics. What I am is a sort of moral nihilist. I do not believe in objective morality, although I do have preferences. For
Hmm.
instance, I'm very critical of self ownership, as many people who are familiar with my Twitter feed would point out. Um, one thing that would sort of
So
critique on a personal level when it comes to capitalism is sort of like one thing that the other side talks about is basically worker exploitation, or not in the Marxist sense, but in the sense that these people have a shitty job and the boss sometimes pushes them around and stuff. I would agree with that to an extent, and I'm sort of have like a sort of model that I'm working on in my head that kind of tweaks that. The critique you guys would give is that if people don't like their job, they could leave. I would say absolutely that is a
right.
answer. That is a answer. I have another answer to that I'm sort of thinking about. I want to run this by you pretty quick. The which is my answer to that. I'm trying to work on a way to sort of synthesize sort of worker co-ops and regular capitalist firms. So basically, what I'm thinking about is basically we have a monocle wearing capitalist at the top of the thing who basically has ultimate power to do whatever with the firm he wants. But also, do you know what a board of directors is?
Right, of course, I have a rough idea what that is. It's where that it, it's all the CEO or all the execs of the company that the owner goes to help advise him on what to do with the company, how to lead it, and so forth.
Yes. Basically, think that,
Like,
except every single worker at the firm is a member of the board of directors. That's sort of
isn't
trying.
that
That's sort of
essentially what libertarian socialists like to ascribe as a worker co-op?
no. With the worker co-ops, it's basically all just flat. Whereas what I'm trying to propose is more hierarchical.
So there
You
is.
still have the boss at the top, sort of who is basically the ultimate decision maker, who is sort of like the ultimate decision maker for the company, except I'm trying to think about a way to sort of I'm trying to take the best aspects of a regular capitalist structure and I'm trying to synthesize it with the best parts of a worker co-op. Although because of my more right-leaning tendencies, I'm more sort of trying making an emphasis on the capitalist part than the worker co-op part. But I think that this model is the best that I could come up with.
So essentially, what am I trying to say here? So essentially, there is still an ultimate owner. If there's like an individual that has founded a company and proceeds to own it from there, own it and run it from there, but every single new worker that guy hires on becomes part of the board of directors. Am I understanding that correct?
Yes.
How so? Everybody gets a say on what gets to be done next, on what we can do to increase profits, on what we can do to improve the workspace, and so forth.
In a sense, yes. Although I would say that it's less a terms of the workers get to sort of tell the boss to do this or that, and it's more so sort of like the workers are sort of the way that I get the way that I understand what a board of directors is that they're basically pitching ideas to the director, pitching ideas to the boss. They're sort of
Right.
like advising the boss saying, no, 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 that would be a bad idea, that would
But
kill profits,
I guess
something
the
like that.
reason as to why that it is set up nowadays to where that there's only a select few people who are a board of directors and then there's the top CEO, president, and owner of the company is because that small board of directors is like all the people that the CEO truly entrusts to help advise him on how to run the company, whereas all the little peon workers and so forth, not quite as much. They haven't truly proven themselves to the CEO to be having a heavy weight of an opinion that the guy will like heavily consider. So, and I just go wondering with your idea here, like what is incentivizing the ultimate owner of the company, the CEO, to consider the opinions of every single new hire that he hires on as some director board member?
um the way that I'm thinking about it is sort of like an individual firm. Like, for instance, you have a chain restaurant, for instance, one McDonald's over here, one McDonald's over there. The way that I'm thinking about it is more sort of localized to each individual firm within that chain. Or whereas, are you talking about sort of like the whole broad scale, or are you talking about just the individual firm?
I'm talking about the whole broad scale because the idea that I had got there was that we're talking about the whole company, not just the single individual shops that fall under the bigger corporation.
I did not think about that. I'm gonna have to give that a thinky think.
Okay. Um, I guess we'll circle on back to the whole capitalism. I don't know if there's like any more questions I have to ask about it, but I'm just gonna read up on the chat here a little
Derpy
bit.
Redneck says a voluntary bridging of private company, a libertarian social order could bridge to make an alternative to corporations would be a syndicate that's not leftist. Um, I'll have to think about that. Thanks, Derpy.
Um, Redfeather says, higher up, I hope the chat isn't going to be quizzed after this philosophy lesson. And Radix's Panarchist Wrestling asks, Osmo Ordo, are you also an egoist Hoppian?
Yes, you could say that. Although I would object to being called a Hoppian purely and simply because, well, I'm not Professor Hoppa, and well, I would object to labels such as um, Marxism in general because um I have a problem with sort of naming ideologies after people, like for instance, like or Titoism, Stalinism, Maoism, all of these things, all of these sort of words as sort of like a the root word of those terms is someone else's name, and I believe sort of those sort of, I don't know, it harkens back to my clay analogy. Don't get your ideas from others. Try to be as much of a independent thinker as you possibly can. Although, for simplicity's sake, for the sake of getting my point across to people, I do refer to myself as a Hoppian from time to time.
Okay. Red Feather asks Schrodinger's beetle, referring to the analogy that you that the
In a
metaphor that you had
sense,
posed a little bit
yes.
earlier with the
In a
this is a
sense,
box.
yes. Although it has
Yeah.
more to do, it has more to do with communication and making sure that I am communicating an accurate point, and less so when you open. No, actually, yes. Maybe it is Schrodinger's beetle.
Oh, well, now DarkCon wants hockey sticks at dawn. I don't know what you mean by that, Red Feather. Please explain. Um, do you two think the non-aggression principle should be required in a capitalist society? Um, I would say yes, except for the fact that I am not a full-on anarchist. That's the only reason why I cannot say
um,
that fully,
I
honestly.
would object to being called an anarchist. I'm not a fan of Proudhon. For the same reason, I'm not a
Really?
fan of it. Yes. It's more to do with the more philosophical basis of it. I read Proudhon. Much like a true continental. He's uses a lot of metaphors and a lot of acronym. He's very metaphorical, a lot like Hegel. Actually, you might find this interesting. I read somewhere that or that Proudhon took ideas from Hegel. That is sort of one of the main reasons why I sort of would object to Proudhonian philosophy, Proudhonian mutualism.
I didn't I didn't notice this
I
until right
reject a
now,
lot
but
of the
it's
more
apparently it's storming
Hegelian.
Norman outside here at my place.
Yeah, I would object to the more Hegelian understanding of. I would object to the more Hegelian aspects of Proudhonism, of mutualism. Um, Other than that, still got the labor theory of value, which is complete horse shit. Although everybody believed in the labor theory of value, including classical economists, up until the marginal revolution. So I wouldn't hold that over his head. Um, in terms of sort of defining anarchism, I think I would say that a lot of people are correct in that anarchism, properly understood, is sort of rejection of all unjustified hierarchies. That brings up the question of what constitutes a justified hierarchy. I looked into this question and sort of, I don't know how to describe it, but the answer to that was, in a sense, very Hegelian, very lifted from Hegel's worldview. I would properly call myself sort of like an anti-statist. I do not believe in a state. For all intents and purposes, I'm an anarchist, although I do reject the more intricate aspects of Proudhonism. But but
Well,
back to
Proudhon
the
is not
question
really
about the,
the only anarchist philosopher or anarchist
yeah. Although
philosophy
he
out
sort
there.
of, I know, but it would be very inaccurate for me as someone who is very self-proclaimed to be on the right to call myself an anarchist, considering that it was born out of leftism. But basically, anyway, back to the question about the NAP. Um, I would say that I do not believe in the non-aggression principle. I would agree with it as a sort of rule of thumb. I do not want to be I do not want to be aggressed upon, and I do not want to aggress upon others. Although one thing I would say is that there are some instances where I would sort of say that this rule of thumb doesn't apply. Whereas, like, if you're basically a creep with a camera following me, I'm going to deck you in the nose, smash your head against a brick wall. I don't care if that violates the map. I don't care if you didn't, if that person didn't aggress. I don't care. That's a stupid thing. I'm gonna pretty much beat you until you stop doing that.
Wait.
Um,
I'm sorry. I'm like, I'm so sorry. I'm directing my attention back and forth between the little thunderstorm that is happening right outside my place here, and also to you. But why would you want to be decking somebody in this
because they're a
rhetorical
creep.
situation?
Because they're a creep following me with a camera.
Yeah, I would disagree with it going that far. Honestly, if anything, I'd probably just retreat into my private property, and if they insisted to keep on following me into my private property, then at that point I would shove them out of the place, and if they continue to refuse, then things would just get increasingly more and more physical and violent by default.
Right.
But as far as like somebody just following around
In
and
terms of an
recording,
actual from first principles justification, I do not believe in the non-aggression principle. Al- Although, like I said before, I agree with it to an extent. I agree with it as a very general rule of thumb.
okay. Um, I mean, I guess I can agree well enough that I don't know. Even though that I ended up
Physically remove the property aggressor, so to speak.
right, even though that a little bit earlier I had a little bit of a political conversation with two of my sisters, which that is a very rare a moment right there in of itself. But in that moment,
Don't let them watch this episode lest their brains explode.
well, I don't know. But anyway, the thing that I was about to mention was that even though in that conversation with them, I pretty much called myself a little bit more of a private property absolutist because we were talking about the COVID lockdowns and all that stuff and people being able to kick people off their private property for whatever reason they wish, be it because they don't like the fact that they are vaxxed or they don't like the fact that they are or they don't like the fact that they are not vaxxed or the fact they don't like the fact that they refuse to wear a mask. And I also applied that to even if they don't like the fact that they are black, they can, for this very same reason of it being their private property and them being the private property owner, kick them out of their private property if they so wish. Or they don't like the fact that they're gay or atheist or Biden or Trump supporter. It's,
Right.
going down the laundry list. I'm going to just even though that I said that I was a bit of a private property absolutist in that moment, I don't know if somebody was to like bring up some odd situation, maybe I would think about it more. But I can see what you're saying about the NAP as far as the absolutism of it. I don't think that there is a way for anybody to be 110% absolutist with every principle. I mean, refer to the flagpole argument that a lot of people apply in response to the NAP.
Yes.
Like David Friedman. I don't know if you had ever watched this episode of Nate the I don't know if you hear that thunder out there, but it's
Actually,
getting
I
kind of loud. But
have.
you seen the one where he was
I
interviewing
have. In
both
fact,
David Friedman and SO? Had them both on his live stream?
yes, I saw that clip from
Jim Jesus.
Jim Jesus before he took it down. Basically, the clip of
Why
the back
did
and forth ESO and
why did Jim
David
Jesus
have.
take that down? I'm curious.
I don't know, but basically, it was kind of funny. He basically took that whole conversation, put funny music in.
Well, I was just gonna say that that would be even though that it's a kind of an out there example, I would still say that that would be a fair example of how that it's hard to be an absolutist on every single principle. Even though that West Savage says flagpole is a fuck ass take as far as I'm concerned, and it's cringe. Well, to each their own, Wes. But still glad that you could join us in the live chat. So to address the live chat a little bit more, what does? Oh, geez. No, I'm not gonna ask that. Waterboard Bob the Builder. Leave him alone, sir. Says Red Feather. Does he believe in flat Earth? Are you asking that question about Osmo
Me?
Ordo
No,
here,
I'm
Red? I
I
don't know how you got that implication, but go ahead, Osmo.
I'm a round earth. I'm a round earther. I am. I I agree with the science on this. I am a round earther. The world is a lot more than 6,000 years old. We did evolve naturally through evolution. We are apes. Blah blah blah.
All right.
I'm. If you're referring to all that stuff I said about Hegel, Kant, all that
You hear that
idealism
one?
stuff.
That's a big thunderstrike right there. Sorry, go on.
Derpy says, "Nah, the Earth is a coke line."
You know, I'm not gonna lie. From what I've heard, it's more like almost potato-ish shaped. Technically, is what the Earth is. Like it's not a perfect sphere, and I can believe it. But you were
Yeah.
saying though, Osmo?
I was just saying that I agree with the current scientific consensus on this stuff.
All right. So Derpy Redneck says it's weird. He's chasing some metaphysics rabbit holes right now. I'm going down the same ones. I think he's
Me?
yeah. I think he's referring to the commentary that you made. All the deep, I
Yeah.
guess,
What I
abstract
would call
philosophy that you
myself
mentioned
right
about
now,
capitalism.
what I would call myself right now is much more I'm reading about this from what little I've read about it. It's sort of something I would absolutely agree with. It's something called transcendental materialism. It's sort of a lot like Kant's transcendental his transcendental idealism, where Kant basically talks about there are two worlds: the world of the things in ourselves and the world of things in ourselves. Kind of like it it determines how our consciousness picks up materials, um, and all that stuff. I would agree with that to an extent, although I would sort of dial it back a bit. I do think that yes, there is a world of things out there. For instance, we don't. I do not think we have to ponder about this pair of dentures. This is actually a mold for my teeth. Uh, for when I got my braces.
uh,
But basically, we don't need to ponder whether or not this exists. I do not need to sort of like look over and like, does this continue to exist when I look away from it? I don't think we have to ponder it. I think that it's quite obvious that it still exists, regardless of if I look away from it. Although I would agree with Kant that, yeah, we do not know things in themselves. They that are sort of that the actual world out there is probably most likely would not be accurately described by our sense perception because of the way that the mind sort of takes in the information and sort of processes it. um you know what I mean. um
so was that it?
it's an idea from
Sorry.
Gilles Deleuze. There's actually a paper about it. Not a paper, but wait, hold on.
So
European Redneck says Hey Osmo, did I introduce you to Max Stirner's work or did someone else did? I'm asking so I can be clear and not worry about this. Um, I don't remember. Um, from what little I remember from when I was first getting into Stirner, when I first heard about Stirner, I think I heard about it from J-Reg. I'm not sure.
Right. Guy is a funny dude.
um,
All the anti-centrism meme-worthy content he'll make.
Anti-centrists unite.
Right.
T-pose.
Um, what was
I know I sent you Kant stuff and others.
So I have a question that's a little bit further up here, if you don't mind me reading it, Osmo.
Sure.
Red Feather asks, I think this is about the whole issue when you were like explaining some of the criticisms that you had with capitalism, I guess. She asks, so he thinks eminent domain is okay?
Eminent domain. From a purely moral standpoint, I wouldn't say that it's okay, and I wouldn't say that it's bad. I would say that it's just neutral. Like I said
Wait, do you
before,
know what eminent domain is?
yes, it's when the government gives you a paper as an excuse to blow up your house to build a railway. Uh,
Okay.
um, I like personally, I have a problem with it. I sort of like my entire critique of the state out of economics. It's pure. Since I don't believe in morality, my entire critique of the state is pretty much it prevents me from doing shit I want to. But I would say that there is sort of nothing moral or immoral about eminent domain, although in response to that, I know someone's going to say, oh, but wouldn't that make Osmo a statist? Not quite, because I would then say that there is nothing moral about you basically murdering the federal agent with a cheese grater. So federal agent comes to the door, knocks on it, shows you the paper with eminent domain. Then you pull him to the house, take him to the kitchen, get your cheese grater, and basically go nuts on him.
Okay, Hannibal Lecter. But what was I gonna say? So you, um, yeah. So yeah, that's a main reason why I would say that I am. The main reason why I would say that I'm against eminent domain is because it is the government forcing a purchase on you that you otherwise would not want. Like you devoted your entire life to this plot of land, and even had many generations before that, like your father and your father's father and your father's father's father, and so on down the line, all owned this land and ran it and whatnot. And now the government is going to say, you no longer get to own this. This is ours for us to build a wall, let's say, for example, Donald Trump, or anything else like that.
China.
Yeah, but that's my problem with eminent domain primarily. But what you think that nobody has an absolute private property right, or right to their private property, to where that the government should not force a purchase on them over their property?
I think it would be best if they didn't force that property. Although this is very uncomfortable for me to say, although
Oh boy.
that it's very uncomfortable for me to say that no, there is nothing inherently immoral about outside of sort of personal taste. I would say that there is nothing inherently wrong about eminent domain. I I find that a very uncomfortable truth that I sort of think about.
It would have
There's
to,
a lot of uncomfortable truth that people have to deal with.
in my
Sort of,
opinion, there would have to be a very severe case in order to justify such a thing. Like we're talking about finally ending the war with Japan, sort of, in order to drop the bombs in order to finally end the war with Japan, sort of severe case, in order to justify
In a sense, yes.
purchasing of a forced purchase of somebody else's already privately owned land. So, hope you don't mind. Continue on with the live chat. Red Feather says, my hubby wants to come on and talk to this guy. Well, might I say, very kindly, introduce your husband to some of my response videos. Maybe
I'm going to be
that'll be a whole lot snappier and also
if you want to
more entertaining to watch. Red, sorry.
To the person who was basically talking about talking to me, if you want to talk to me, don't do this after the stream, because after this I'm going straight to bed. It's 10 o'clock. It's late. I want to basically but basically, if you want to talk to me at any time, basically ping me on Discord. Presumably you're on the, what's it called again? The DarkCon server. Presumably
Red
you're on
Feather.
DarkCon server.
Red Feather.
You can ping me at TDM on my, that's my sort of Twitter name, or not my Twitter name, my Discord name.
He also goes by the nickname of White Snake in my Discord server. If you have a hard time finding his name,
I changed the name. I changed the name from White Snake.
Okay, I gotcha. What was? This is one that I definitely wanted to read right here. Derpy Redneck said, anarchism goes back to the ancient Greek word anarchos, which meant no central ruler, which implies unjustified hierarchies are those created by central rulers, and private property never will be that. So I guess he was kind of making the point that the idea of anarchism doesn't originate with Proudhon or whoever a philosopher that you mentioned there that originated with
Proudhon? Yeah, I said Proudhon.
I think it's pronounced Proudhon. I mean, I pronounced it for the longest time as Proudhon, and I was thinking to myself,
I don't know, the French are weird. French are weird. Like, we're over here debating about, we're debating the trivial stuff about France. Why aren't we talking anything about snails? Why snails? Why do you eat snails? Like, out of all the things you could talk about France, why are you talking about the pronunciation of a specific French name? Why not, why not attack the big stuff, like snails?
Why would you talk about the different kinds of socialism?
Derpy says exactly.
Right. I think he's referring to anarchism never started with Proudhon, I think is what he meant to say, but you both pronounced it correctly. But the way DarkCon just said his name is correct. Okay. Gotcha. Thanks for the clarification there, Derpy.
So it's Proudhon, not Proudhon? Or wait, who was saying what? I just had a brain fart.
Derpy Redneck said exactly. Anarchism never started with Proudhon, but you both pronounced it correctly. I think he's referring to the name. But the way DarkCon just said his name is correct. Okay.
Wait, Derpy, when you said exactly, were you talking about my rant about snails, or him talking about how anarchy started in Greece?
Yeah, and not with Proudhon. See, to sort of get what? Oh man, I'm losing my place here. Trying to. I guess that's it for right now, anyways. And hello, Cat Chat in the live chat. That's all that really sticks out with the live chat as far as questions being asked. If there's any questions that you guys would like to be asked on this conversation specifically, well then ask them again, and then I'll try to make sure to write them down in my WordPad here, or my Word document, whatever. But okay, there's one question in particular that I want to ask you that I just remembered right now. You said that you have some criticisms with private property. That is one thing. I don't know if you remember it. That was mentioned in the live stream specifically. Like Damon the Clown Archist, he said that he wants an abolishment of private property, or at least a reconsideration of the principles of private property. And there was a little bit of a back and forth that got started between Raja, Aaron, and I think Night Shift and Gavi, the ethical pirate, as well about that subject. But you specifically, what is the criticisms that you have with private property and the ethics behind it, libertarian principles of it?
I would sort of agree on a face value that yes, private property is good. We shouldn't expropriate bosses. We shouldn't take anything from anybody. My problem with it is less to do with private
Wait,
property itself. Like, um, I think that it is good, or at least subjectively, that we own stuff. I do not want to abolish anything or anything to do with private property. My problem with it has to do with we if we backtrack to the field of ethics and sort of like why do we own stuff? Um, I am a like I said before, a moral nihilist. I do not believe in objective morality. Although I would say
by
that
the way, very
I
quickly,
prefer the term moral subjectivism. I
hey
think that
Osmo,
those terms are, yeah.
to answer your question earlier about why did Derpy Redneck say exactly, he says it was my commentary about anarchism's origins as a concept
Right.
and the original definition. But sorry,
But
you
at
were saying
least you
Osmo?
agree with me about snails, Derby. Do you agree with me about snails?
Right. So you don't believe in, I guess, objectivism is the way that you say it. You don't believe in objective
Objective morals,
morality,
yes. I think that
and
a
that's
lot of
why
the
that you.
problems with sort of the things like self ownership, things like all that stuff is, I think it's built on faulty logic. I do not want to go over that because I'm working on a thing on Google Docs, thing about it. And another reason why I don't want to go over this is I want to go to bed.
Oh.
Basically, I think that sort of but basically, to sum it up, I don't think that there is any kind of objective basis for private property other than personal preference, and I would sort of
Wait.
defend, but I would sort of take the sort of private property absolutism, the kind of private property absolutism that you subscribe to, and I would sort of justify that on sort of on a subjective basis, if you will. Um,
I
what
would
else?
disagree with private property ethics being based off of personal preference. I think that the way that we libertarians like to approach it is a sort of a more naturalistic and natural rights framing of things. Like the only moment of when that it's okay to invade in any way on somebody else's rights or being is if they had done something without your consent to yourself. In the case of private property rights, okay, here's this piece of land, absolutely nobody has claim to it. Person one decides to come in and claim that land for themselves and start running it, owning it, and utilizing it however that they want. And then person B, he comes in, wants to try to do something to that private property. No, when you want to invade in on that private property, you are essentially invading in on person one's rights and doing it without their consent. And so you're not allowed to do that. That is and so it's quit doing whatever it is that you're doing on the private property. Otherwise, get kicked out. And so that's the basis of
Um,
private property
I would
rights right
sort
there.
of object to natural law on sort of the basis that it
I don't
how
know
do
if
I describe it?
I don't know if I would call it a natural law because natural law almost seems to imply a sort of I don't know, the circle of life kind of mother nature mumbo, well, the not
Um,
mumbo jumbo.
Not
necessarily, but
really. For instance, Ayn Rand, who was a very harsh critic of religion, very harsh critic of mysticism, she too believed in natural law. Natural law, at least from my understanding of it in sort of philosophical circles, is the idea that there is this that basically something, whatever it is, has a fixed nature, and what that thing ought to do ought to be based on that fixed nature. Um, this falls into a couple traps. First of all, it falls into Hume's law, Hume's guillotine. You can't derive an ought from an is, because in order to bridge that gap, you would need to get an ought from somewhere, which I do not think can be done. But there's also a much more fundamental critique of saying, does everything really have an essence? Like, I do not think that there is any that I do not think that things have fixed natures. Um, Basically, that is my critique of natural law.
by the way, I would suggest kind of ignoring the chat right now so as to not get yourself too distracted. There's no offense to one person at least that you've kind of provoked a little bit in my live chat. It seems.
Who did I provoke?
Not derpy redneck, but nonetheless, don't
Is
let
it
them
that
distract
person
you.
named No One?
Yeah.
Ah.
Well, let me ask you this as far as private property goes. Overall, in most circumstances, you would say, hey, live and let live. You can do whatever you want. You can do whatever you want with your private property, be it your business or your home, and nobody else has a right to do whatever they want with that private property. It's just that you think that there is some super rare exception that exists within the world of where that you'd say, no, you don't get full rights over your private property, and that's the only reason why you would not call yourself a private property absolutist, or would not really call
No, I
yourself
would call myself a private property absolutist. I'm sort of a subjectivist about it. I think that sort of it's best for everybody if we were all private property absolutists. I just sort of acknowledge that yes, this is based on subjective whims, but I don't really care.
Well, then,
It works,
what's the
so
issues that you have
why?
with private property under capitalism if you're a
Wait,
private
pardon?
property absolutist?
Wait, pardon?
Well, if you're a private, if you do say that you're a private property absolutist, well, then what's the problem again that you have with private property under capitalism? I mean, the whole reason why this tangent
Um.
got brought up is because I wanted to ask about a
Oh,
much earlier
right.
thing that you said on this live stream, of where that
I
you
thought
were
it was
all
sort of.
like, that you have some criticism of private property when it comes to capitalism, and I'm just a little bit confused. Like,
Um.
you say that
That
you have all these criticisms
was my
against.
critique. That was my critique of it. That I don't think that it sort of. I don't think it can be justified on any kind of objective basis. Outside of that, no problems whatsoever.
So you do advocate for private property rights, but you don't think it can be justified off of any objective metric, any objective
Yes.
standard of philosophy or morals that everybody has. Um. Okay. But by the way, thanks for answering my question there, no one in the live chat. Uh, he says, sorry if it looked like I got a little triggered. It's okay, no one.
It's cool.
I was just asking
It's
him.
cool. We're friends.
I was just asking him essentially if he was a viewer and donator of the Sitch and Adams show, because there's this one guy whom Sitch would read off on occasion in his super chat lists in his during his live streams, who goes by the name of No One as well. And I'm just wondering if this is that very same No One. I'm a big time fan of the Sitch and Adams show, even though they kind of annoy me on some things, like when it comes to modern monetary theory or any other
I
kind of
need to look
libertarian
into
skeptical things that they have.
Stitch and Adams. I've been meaning to for quite some time now.
They are good for what purpose that they serve, like when it comes to responding to leftists. So they are good in that area. Yeah, it's all right. No one. Okay. So, yeah, I don't know. I guess I do not know how to take it from there on the whole point about
Yeah.
private property rights.
I've pretty much said everything I wanted to within this live stream. If there's anything you want to do, if you want to sort of kill time by asking me irrelevant questions about what are my thoughts on floppy disks or sci-fi or what do I think
No,
about dog poop? What do I think
what the
about
heck?
birds? Something about that.
Dog poop. I'm
If you
gonna
want to go
stop you
on a
right
tangent
there.
about,
Sorry, I'm gonna stop you right there. I mean, I do have one more question lined up here. Actually, two more that is a little bit more about beliefs. But I guess before we go into that, was there any particular criticisms or anything in particular that you wanted to mention about the capitalism special? Because I know that you had some things that you. There
um,
were some criticisms and feedback that you gave to me over DMs about it. And by the
I
way, it
think
wasn't anything
that
of throwing shade towards any of the guests, is what he told me in DMs. Just mind you,
um,
everybody.
I think that some people sort of the people in on the side of the anti-capitalists, I think that a lot of their criticisms of capitalism were sometimes arbitrary, and I think that's good. I personally acknowledge that if you're going to critique sort of a political system, being someone or not believing in objective morals, I would agree that yes, if you do critique a political system, it is going to be an arbitrary critique. But they sort of treated
Huh.
it as objective, which I don't think you can.
Oof.
Um,
Um. Yeah. I don't know.
Another
Um.
critique I would give is that for a lot of the people on the right, on the I wouldn't say on the right, but people who are generally in favor of capitalism, I think
You'd
that
say
their opening
people
statements, a lot
on.
of the things that they were saying, were less about sort of defending capitalism, and their opening statements were more so sort of describing who they were, which I guess is
Hmm.
good. I think you, if you are to give a have sort of like an opening statement, I think you should dedicate like 5 minutes to establishing who you are, but making that your whole making that your entire opening statement, I don't think you shouldn't have done that.
Well, what? You, are you referring to my opening statement or everyone or?
Your opening statement, if I remember correctly, was pretty much on the mark with what I'm talking about. I think you did try to defend capitalism. I think you did do a good job at it, defending
Okay.
private property. Other than that,
Well, thank you.
some people who are on the pro-capitalist side did sort of fall into what I was saying about uh,
If I may,
basing their
if I may say very quickly, though, thanks for the compliment, by the way. But if I may say, as far as the anti-capitalist side, I don't know if I would put it. Excuse me, that they were like acting like anything that was arbitrary or subjective was in fact objective. I did not detect anything of that level of arrogance or uh, eh, I'm not trying to say that you're calling them arrogant or anything like that, but I just did not detect anything like that myself when I was listening to them all give their spiels about the subject and whatnot.
I did not say they were being arrogant. I said that they were being arbitrary.
Okay. Well, let me rephrase it. I guess I just, in general, did not see them as much acting like this arbitrary thing is objective. I did not detect that very much out of them. But that's just me. I mean, we all have our differing opinions.
Yeah.
and of course
We
you
all
could
have
if.
different speckles.
And I
Or
guess
we
if
all have
there was a particular talking point that was brought up in that live stream that you could point out to sort of break down what you're trying to say there, then that would be good before.
something that I point or wait, you're referring to something I said
No. A
or
talking point
something
on.
else
I'm talking
I
about
had?
something said specifically on that live stream on the capitalism special. If there was anything that you wanted to point out specifically from that live stream, so as to explain and point out how people were acting like something was arbitrary, was actually objective or whatever, then that would be helpful. But otherwise, I don't know if we could go any further on that.
Um, Another sort of critique I would give is
Okay.
about the live stream is pretty much the debate itself. Um, I when I say this, I don't mean to throw any shade. And Nate, if you're in the chat, do not take this as basically a dig at you. But like one thing I've kind of noticed about him is basically one time he would say that oh, I don't really care what you call yourself, and the next time he's basically talking about uh shit, what was I thinking about? He would basically talk about how you shouldn't care about what you call yourself, something like that. You should call yourself what you want. He doesn't care, and then next moment he's basically going on a tirade about not a tirade, but basically he would basically say that the people who are saying it's a semantic issue, why are you worrying about it, are missing the point. Like is hold on. So
Well,
you would say that
maybe if I was to interview him sometime like October 1st. At this point, it's looking like it's going to be October 1st when I interview Nate. But maybe when I interview him, he'd be able to elaborate a little bit further on his thought process on
yeah,
that you just mentioned right there.
right.
Because I think I might know what you're trying to say. He'll say one moment that that he does not care of what people want to call themselves, but then the next moment he'll inadvertently, be it intentional or not, act like as if he does care. But then again, maybe it's a sort of chicken or the egg kind of situation. Like
Yeah, we all
who
have
got more work
cognitive dissonance. I have cognitive dissonance. You
yeah,
have
like,
cognitive dissonance. We all do
well,
that
that wasn't what
sometimes.
I was
I'm just
referring to.
pointing it out. I'm not trying to.
That
I'm
wasn't what I
not
was
trying
referring to,
to
though.
say that there's any malintent behind this. I'm not trying to sort of.
Well, that wasn't what I was
I'm
trying to
not trying
refer
to.
to, Osmo.
I'm not trying to
Osmo.
put you into a corner. I'm sort of genuinely.
Osmo.
Yeah.
That wasn't what I was trying to refer to, though. When I
Yeah.
was saying a chicken or the egg kind of situation, I was meaning of who would get worked up in a certain way, so as it looks like the person does care too much kind of situation. Who got worked up first, or overly passionate? Let me put it that
At the
way.
moment.
Yeah, within the moment of whatever moment argument it was. Because I wasn't trying to go on about cognitive
Yeah.
dissonance right
I
there, but
guess.
yeah.
Cognitive dissonance is basically when you hold two contradictory viewpoints. A lot of us do this
Sure.
implicitly. There's a lot of contradictory positions that I hold that I'm probably not aware of. There's a lot of things that you do that contradict that you're not aware of. It's natural. We're all human. I was just pointing that out. I
Yeah,
was just trying to.
DarkCon, he calls himself a libertarian, but at the same time he sees a minimalist state, nothing being wrong with it.
No, I was thinking cognitive
No.
dissonance
I was
as.
just I was making a joke at any of the more purist
Okay.
anarchists who would be all like, DarkCon is no true libertarian. No, that wasn't. That was just a joke at their expense,
Yeah.
not at you or anything. Not a dig at you.
Yeah, I know. So what else you got on the chopping block?
All right. Yeah. I guess we'll sort of leave aside the capitalism special. I think we might have said all that we wanted to, generally, anyways. But when we go over the capitalism special, maybe me and Nate will get a little bit more in depth with it come October 1st. But nonetheless, so two things. Um, Actually, three things more specifically. Postmodernism. When you say that you are a postmodernist, like that term typically gets more applied to
Yeah.
SJWs and what they believe, like the B. Peterson types would apply. So, define
I
what you mean by you have some postmodernist kind of belief.
sympathies. Okay. So basically, the way that I got into it sort of has to do with my interest in the Dark Enlightenment, or it's commonly called the neo-reactionary movement. It's spearheaded by the blogger Curtis Yarvin, or as he's popular and known by his pen name, the similar name that I got, Osmo Ordo. Osmo Ordo, like Mencius Moldbug, is a pen name that I go by. So basically, Mencius Moldbug writes this blog called Unqualified Observations, and which is very much very influential. He wrote from, I think the timeline of it was 2007 to 2013, and this was very influential within libertarian circles. Um, Yarvin is, I would describe him as a kind of post libertarian. He basically takes Hans Hermann Hoppe's Democracy of the God That Fails and basically injects some Thomas Hobbes into that. He basically says that, well, if monarchy is true libertarianism, why not just have monarchy and something? And basically, his model for an ideal society would basically be, it's been called neo feudalism. I would object to that, him being called a neo feudalist. What he advocates more or less is sort of like a patchwork or a sort of web of hundreds of millions of tiny states, all run by monarchs. You could say that sort of that there's internal, so that there's competition between each monarchy for customers, or in this case, they would be called citizens, so to speak. And I got into that about a year ago. I didn't around the time I was very new to libertarianism. I was still an anarchist, and I still am. Although I do think that especially his analytics, his thinking about things called his analytics about modern culture, his this thing called the cathedral. I think that all those are very spot on understandings about that. And then after I got into Curtis Yarvin, I also got into this other guy who I mentioned at the beginning of this stream when I was talking about capitalism, artificial intelligence, Nick Land. Nick Land is, he sort of turned to the right, as I mentioned earlier. He turned to the right because he sort of read Moldbug, and after reading it, he did some work of his own and is now pretty much one of the founding fathers the uh, of the neo-reactionary movement. Now, the interesting about Land is that he sort of has more of a leftist milieu. You could say that his two biggest influences are sort of two postmodernist thinkers named Gilles Deleuze and Felix Guattari. They are they're leftists. For all intents and purposes, they're leftists. Although they're sort of more like Yarvin than a lot of people realize. One of the things that Gilles Deleuze and Felix Guattari would talk about is this thing called deterritorialization, which is basically the process that old institutions are sort of like become dispersed, or they become broken down. That's the best way I could describe it. And basically, this happens to society. They basically talk about how they could use capitalism as sort of this means which undermines current institutions as a way to accelerate it's to its limit, collapse it, and basically but sort of Land took a more right wing
So,
interpretation of this. And so basically, when I got into Land, I immediately, after getting into Land, got into Felix Guattari, got into Gilles Deleuze and Felix Guattari. And I thought, after looking up these two, I thought, like, wait, these guys are postmodernists, but they also, on the same hand, are very critical of this of this social justice stuff. And I'm like, what's going on? I thought, didn't Jordan Peterson tell me that postmodernism is about social justice? And I continued to look into, and basically that's when I sort of began to see postmodernism in this new light. I began to read and reread a lot of postmodernist literature. I looked up a lot of philosophy podcasts, looked up episodes about the postmodern theorists, and I think
so if I may, like, say something to maybe help break down the idea here. So, postmodernism, as I vaguely remember Jordan Peterson explaining it, postmodernism would be the SJW's attempt to try and collapse the current society and social order that we have for a new um,
yes,
as it
what I'm
implies
talking about.
postmodernist social order, but yours is essentially the same thing, but it's not an SJW version of it, but rather a
Um,
some kind of
no.
right wing version of it.
No, I'm talking specifically about Gilles Deleuze and Felix Guattari. That's pretty much the stuff that they talk about. They talk about a lot more stuff than just politics and accelerating capitalism to its limits. If you think that's all Gilles Deleuze and Felix Guattari have to offer, I would have to laugh you out the room. That is far from the only stuff they write about. Um, but
Okay.
basically, the way that I would define postmodernism as sort of the rejection of meta narratives. That's the very most common. That's the most common understanding of it. What a meta narrative is basically, well, I wouldn't say that it's a rejection of meta narratives. I would more so characterize it as skepticism towards meta narratives. What a meta narrative is sort of like an overarching explanation of how things work, or over explanation, or an overarching explanation about a given phenomena. To take, for instance, Marxism, you got things like the theory of the theory of exploitation, the labor theory of value that sort of supports the theory of exploitation. Things like falling rate of profits, class consciousness, dialectical materialism. Basically, Marx reading Hegel, he basically took Hegel and basically copy pasted. He basically copy pasted materialism onto Hegel without the idealism stuff. Um, that's what a lot of young Hegelians do. A lot of the old Hegelians, as they're called, are more idealists, whereas the young Hegelians are materialists. Um, so basically, all that stuff about Marxism is sort of a meta narrative. For instance, you could two people with very different ideologies could look at the same sort of phenomena. Something happens to the economy, they both look at it, and because of their worldview, let's say one guy is a Marxist, the other guy is a Rothbardian, they look at it and they come to completely different results. Um, Sort of that's kind of where postmodernists are getting at. Um, I would sort of, to an extent, say that that's the case. I do not think that that meta narratives are entirely unjustified. Like I said, again, it's a skepticism toward them than a flat out rejection of it. But that's basically it. Um, you'd have to. There's a lot sort of more. differentiation between the postmodernist thinkers, like not just in politics, but in the more analytic side of things. For instance, Michel Foucault talks a lot about knowledge. Jacques Derrida talks about language. Gilles Deleuze talks about ontology, metaphysics, um, and a lot of that stuff. And a lot of postmodernists disagree with politics too. For instance, Jacques Derrida is pretty much he's flat out Marxist. Um, Very unpostmodernist of him. There's also Michel Foucault, who I remember reading somewhere about him being basically Michel Foucault is economically pretty much a copy paste Milton Friedman, a copy paste uh, Thomas Sowell. Yeah, out of all the major postmodernist thinkers, the two that I predominantly would have to agree with are Michel Foucault and Gilles Deleuze.
Okay. Yeah, I still don't know if I have a full understanding of your version of postmodernism, whatnot. So, I don't know. Maybe I'll have to like re-listen in order to get a
That's
full
cool.
grasping of it. So I guess the next thing that I'll ask about, and then I'll ask you to reveal the thing that you said that you kind of want to shill, and then we'll go away from
Um,
there. But right
European
acceleration is
Redneck in the chat says,
oh
um, yes, right accelerationism is pretty much the view that
okay.
society is defined, that society is a process of positive feedback mechanisms as opposed to negative feedback mechanisms. As I explained when I was talking
Wait.
about capitalism and artificial intelligence, what a positive feedback loop is basically that feedback loop where you have the input output which cycles back into the input, and as the process cycles, the whole system of it becomes more complex, more intricate, and as that happens, sort of
So wait.
society undergoes a process of deterritorialization, which is what Gilles Deleuze and a lot of contemporary left accelerationists would do, whereas they view it as sort of capitalism more so. They view this as a mechanism for capitalism's own
Wait.
destruction. I view it as more
One
so,
moment, Osmo.
yeah.
Um, So you're not talking about accelerationism as in the idea of anarchists wanting to like destroy the current society as quickly as they can so as to get an anarchist society instead. You're talking about something completely different from that instead, correct?
Yes, I mean something more in the realm of cybernetics. And when I say
Yeah,
cybernetics,
because
I don't mean robots. I mean sort of like a there's a field of social theory called cybernetics. For instance, F.A. Hayek talks a lot about, well, he's not explicitly cybernetic, although a lot of cybernetic theorists have picked up on Friedrich Hayek. So have I. I have picked up on Hayek in a sense, you know. As I was saying, so basically, as capitalism becomes more complex, a more intricate thing, it goes from this simplistic model to basically something incomprehensible, indescribable. This what we would see is a mess, but what it would actually be is basically a very complex web that in a sense, capitalism is very Lovecraftian in the sense that what we see and what we think about it isn't even the isn't even the breadth of it. You know what I mean? Um, what the main disagreement between left accelerationists and right accelerationists is sort of where we're going and what's going on. For instance, the left accelerationists would be a more akin to what you think, sort of what your initial thoughts about it were. So basically, let's chug this thing along until it can no longer sustain itself, then it falls apart. Whereas the right accelerationists are a lot more complex. The way that I would describe it is basically capitalism, or if you're very anal about the definition of capitalism, I can use the words liberalism. Basically, liberalism becomes so complex that it basically begins to consume on its own. It begins to basically, from the inside out, begins to sort of eat the state. You know what I mean? As it expands, it's very automatic agorism, I guess you could say that. Basically, you don't need to go out and the way that I would describe it as is basically it's like agorism, except in the sense that you don't need to go out and do all that counter economic stuff, because the market is going to do that automatically. It's like an AI. It's basically back to the AI example. It's basically the market's consuming all of the government and all that stuff. It's basically written within the programming of capitalism, or if you like the term, I could say that it's written within the programming of liberalism, of classical liberalism. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I suppose so. Um, you want to be able to circumvent the current society to get it to a more classical liberalism.
Yes, in a
Okay.
sense, yes. Although I would say a more radical classical liberalism, something along the lines of Gustav de Molinari than what's his name again, of John Locke. Um, Gustav de Molinari was the first classical liberal to ever advocate for complete statelessness, and politically indistinguishable from people like Murray Rothbard or Hans Hermann Hoppe. Although he lived at a time when the word anarchist meant leftist, basically. So he did not call himself a leftist. Gustav de Molinari. Um, you know. Um,
Yeah, because leftists seem to get a little bit more of a bad rap than what he's intending to attach himself, and the idea being of state intervention in the economy, or
yeah,
maybe not necessarily state interventionism, but coercion of economic activities just in general. Like,
yeah,
for example, ANCOMs, who just really turn out to be mob rule communists in a lot of cases. But all right, so I guess that was
that's
basically all you wanted to explain about that.
yes.
All right, I think we have pretty much come to the end of this live stream, you all. I would like to thank my guest Osmo Ordo here of coming onto the live stream. But before we actually go off air, Osmo, you say that you have something that you would like to shill out to the
Um,
to everybody
I
listening.
have I have a Twitter account which is at operate anortho, although
Wait,
that's
that's it?
spelt with zeros. What I also have, it's not accessible at this point. It's still in the works. It's still sort of in the blueprints. I have it planned out. I'm still working on it, although it's going to be more. It's I'm working on a WordPress sort of a WordPress page where I'm writing about stuff like some of the stuff that we went over tonight. I'm working on there, trying to expand upon what I'm thinking about, sort of explain in greater detail what I mean by this or that. I'm trying to sort of work this all in my head, and I'm sort of writing it out on Google Docs at this moment. And when I'm
Okay.
done, I'm going to upload it onto that WordPress page. And yeah,
and then share the link around. So essentially,
Yeah.
you're working on a kind of a political blog sort of thing. Am I getting that right?
Yes. Yes. I
All
used
right.
to have one on on blogspot.com, although I sort of closed it down because of how slow things were going. I was sort of like I didn't have very much ideas back then, so I made sort of the writing process very slow. It was like a 3 month, 4 months into the project, I only had 2 pages out, and I was like, you know what? I'm not. This process isn't gonna go, go out any faster. I might as well close it down and try to approach this later, which is now what I'm doing.
All right. Well, definitely keep us up to date on that, and shill
I
it on the
will.
various different shill channels and the various different Discord servers that you're on, including, of course, yours truly right here, the Discord server of yours truly right here. But anyway, yeah, I think that's all that we have to say. Any other final words that you want to say before we go off air, Osmo?
Yes. A couple things. A, snails are bad. Do not eat them. Second, I do not care what you think. Peter Cushing's doctor in the 1960s TV movie is not that bad. All the Doctor Who fans who complain about, oh, Peter Cushing isn't canon, shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up, okay? Peter Cushing's doctor is not that bad. Calm yourself down. Watch the movie. It's actually pretty good.
Wait, Peter
And
Cushing, that's the guy who played as Grand Moff Tarkin in Star Wars, isn't he?
yes,
He played as Doctor Who?
in a TV movie, although the TV movie is not canon.
Hmm.
It's in the movie he actually goes by he actually calls himself Doctor Who instead of the Doctor. But other than that, wash your
Interesting.
hands, do pick up your dog poop in the backyard. Um,
You just had to bring
mail
up dog poop
mail
again.
dog shit in the back, or pick up your dog poop, put them in envelopes, and mail them to the IRS. Other than that, good night, everyone. Peace out.
Yes, so thank you all for joining on and sending your chat comments. And good night, no one. Good night, Cat Chat. Good night, Derpy Redneck, and everybody else. I am, of course, your host, the Dark Conservatarian, and this is my guest, Osmosis Jones, here. And this has been Strike Force Interviews. And y'all take care and have a good rest of your Labor Day weekend, y'all.